Please join me in praying that I don't say something we all regret. These are dangerous times. Mr. President, are you sure about this? It's not a coincidence that in the scriptures poverty is mentioned more than 2,100 times.
Look in my eyes, what do you see?
These issues are as alive as they ever were.
Neon lights, Nobel Prize, when a mirror speaks, the reflection lies.
This is not about charity, it's about justice.
I know your anger, I know your dreams.
But justice and equality are mates, aren't they? Justice always wants to hang out with equality, and equality is a real pain in the ass.
I'm the smiling face of your TV.
I changed the channel.
Oh, there's a law of compensation, and there's an accounting to be held, an accounting that shall make the Depression of 1929 seem as a prosperity when it breaks upon.
Only you can set you free. The cult of personality.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
You gave me fortune. You gave me fame. You gave me power in your God's name.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Indigenous Nightmare Podcast. I told you guys that I was going to have something special for episode 20. We could forget about episode 20 because this is episode 19 now. This originally was supposed to be episode 20. Today I have Diallo Kenyatta. You guys might know him from Earn Your Liberation, Broly Diallo show. I believe there's a radical... I forget the last
Rational Radicals.
Rational Radicals,
With
and
Skip Coon,
yeah, with Skip. This individual I have for a long period of time watched, and been able to find a lot of truths and what his labor has produced for the masses. And so I just want to say, for one, thank you for joining.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, today's conversation is going to be centered for you guys around FBA and ADOS. I have already talked about these hecklers, these grifters, and how they're ideologically counter-revolutionary to anything that even the talk of reparations with them should be in question. But today, me and Bro Diallo are going to try and dissect for you guys why these organizations, these institutions are not for the African diaspora. They're not for people in general to be associating themselves with. And the second topic is going to be around a discussion that I think a lot of people are, trying to refrain from, as far as, having this being a contradiction, a valid contradiction, which is that, religion has played a very big role in genocide, and it always has, and it's doing so right now, currently what's going on in Palestine. So again, welcome, Bro Diallo, to the show. Like I told you before we recorded, you make me nervous just because y'all are a big media conglomerate. So
I wish.
But first, I'd like to, what are your experiences with FBA over, the past 20 years? Because I believe Tariq Nasheed has tried to. He's took this from ADOS. So it first started off, in my opinion, from my knowledge, as American descendants of slaves, which is an organization that is funded by John Stanton, which is avid eugenicist. And then that kind of turned into FBA, Foundational Black Americans, and then there's Freedmen, which is then a co-opted term from the original Freedmen. So if you could kind of when did you start hearing this terminology of ADOS and FBA?
Well, really, this isn't anything new. This struggle within the Black community is as old as Reconstruction. There were even manifestations of this during the civil rights and Black Power era, where you had the Pan-Africanists and the Kawaiists. There have always been factions within the Black community that assert that we are Americans, and that it should be the foundation for our in defining our interests, defining our identity, and plotting a course for our community as a whole. To rally around our citizenship status and our history within the United States, and cultivating and strengthening our status within the United States, or what I just call it's just another form of integrationism. You know, saying that the best way forward for Black people is to better and fully integrate with the systems and institutions of the United States. That is a fight that's been going on, whereas the camp or the ideology or the agenda that I embrace is one that's saying that African people of the African diaspora, our best plot forward is to not align ourselves with our former masters, our former Jim Crow oppressors, and our current imperialist oppressors, or our fellow countrymen, as you would call it, to align ourselves with their agenda, their interests, their values, is to align ourselves with the oppressed people of the world, and to strengthen our ties and formalize our ties with Africans on the continent and the African diaspora from Haiti to Brixton. But this is not a new struggle. It has been around. It has often been financed by insidious interest outside of our community. White people, mainly the white elites, have always thought. When I was very young, there was a rap group by the name of Poor Righteous Teachers, and they had a line in one of their tracks. I can't remember the track exactly. Said, "Well, in school they're teaching me that my history starts in slavery." There was always an agenda amongst our oppressors to tell the Black person under their colonial or chattel slavery to what they call fractionalize us. Our oppressors have always pushed tribalism and always pushed factions and divisions. And it was very obvious. You used to hear when I was younger, divide and conquer, divide and conquer. And just like in other forms of neo-colonialism, things that our oppressors used to do to us, they now hire individuals or groups within our community to carry out their work for them. So it's a new neo-colonial mindset. Now we have Black people out here advocating tribalism, fraction, and divisions, and unjust hierarchies, when they're doing the work of white people for compensation, for direct and indirect compensation. So this is nothing new. If you look at our history, liberation-minded Black people have always had to confront and combat integrationist Blacks. And unfortunately, because the integrationist Blacks, their ideas and agendas align and serve the interest of our oppressors, they always get more promotion, they get bigger platforms, and they have more money, and they have more quote unquote legitimacy. So we work from a deficit. Revolution have to pretty much use guerrilla tactics, whereas our enemies within, the race traders, and I think that term needs to be given a renaissance, because race traders are more prevalent than ever, but we never hear that terminology. We don't speak in that terminology anymore. So the race traders have always been here, but every time they emerge, they pretend like they're brand new, like, oh, I'm coming with something brand new. This is some old, soggy, moldy shit. ADOS and FBA is old, salty, and mold. It's been plaguing us since Reconstruction, and some house Negro shit. Roundabout way to say.
Yeah, well, I think you hit everything, on the nail. And I, kind of to give, some individuals kind of, who started ADOS, or kind of what they feel it is. I don't even know if I should play these videos. I don't think I will. I think I will, just so that you guys can get kind of an understanding of the ignorance that these individuals produce. Let me see right here, ADOS.
nobody did that. Ain't nobody been around here judging her blackness. What we have judged is her lineage and her attachment to American DO, descendants of slaves. She has a Jamaican parent and an Indian parent, and neither of those parents is an American DOS, descendant of chattel slavery in this country. Not everywhere slavery. We know that was slavery in other parts of the world. But if you in the Caribbean or one of those places, if you in Haiti, then your issue, as we've said here many a times, is with the French. And if you ever get reparations from the French, I will clap, I will be happy, I will throw you a party, I will buy you a drink, baby, but I will not try to take your money. I will not try to eat that fruit, because I don't have no bones buried in Haiti. My bones is buried in here. I celebrate you, I will help you, but I understand that that is yours, and I think you understand that too. So the real issue is, just like I'm not Jamaican, just like I'm not Haitian, just like I'm not Eritrean, you are not American DOS.
Do you have any kind of rebuttal to that? Because I mean, they're not ideologically sound in history, and you could tell from the jump.
Exactly.
You know, and I think that is something that for a lot of individuals from the African diaspora could point out, but they're not, because for one, I feel like there's also an educational barrier that's there. A lot of these individuals are not really ready or wanting to sit down and have the uncomfortable conversations that need to be had on what we really should be talking about. You know, should we be talking about, you know, some celebrity who just, you know, sold, you know, their business or is, you know, profited off of, you know, exploitation of workers? Or should we be talking about how rhetoric like this is being spewed, you know, into our communities? It's being overtaken and taken into truth, which then puts the, and I'm sorry, because I don't call them white folks, I call them snow roaches, because that's exactly what they are. And these are the individuals that know what they're doing to our communities, don't give a shit what they're doing to our communities, i.e. the music industry, i.e. you know, every organization that is not led by someone who is from the African diaspora or is fully fully black led, but are in these communities and saying that they're working with our you know, our comrades. You know, this rhetoric is I come across this rhetoric every single time I canvass, every single time. You know, when someone questions me like, oh, how are you indigenous? Well, I can historically tell you how I'm indigenous, and I don't put, you know, I don't step on anybody's toes to try and say that I'm indigenous. No, I'm indigenous because my mom is Kosinoa Rumson. She comes from what would be considered anywhere from Silicon Valley, San Francisco, Monterey Bay, anywhere in between those areas and up towards Mount Diablo. You know, on my father's side, I can, you know, trace his lineage back to chattel slavery, which that means that I come from Africa. And I think that like me having to dissect that completely every single time, not as I don't have a problem with it, but it's like I get individuals that question it. Well, like how are you calling yourself indigenous when all these they always want to bring up hundreds and hundreds of years of, you know, people having intercourse with each other. So how do you know if you're really this? And I don't really care for those types of conversations, but to, you know, for my viewers to understand, these are the type of individuals that I have to work with on a day-to-day basis, like literally that I have to in society. I work at Amazon. So, you know, there's people there that I literally seen Tariq Nasheed shirt, FBA. I'm like, what? Like how is this? But then again, this is what white capitalism wants us to focus on, is to say, hey, we're not from Africa, we're from here, so that they can then go and exploit and steal. So I feel like I went on a tangent. I do apologize about that, but you know, like, what are your thoughts, you know, on on this? You know, that we're segregated. You know, we have our own fights to fight. You know, instead of it being a collective, as we're all from, and you know, an African diaspora, as far as, you know, blacks are concerned. So.
Right. Well, ADOS and FBA, its bastard offspring, have pretty much turned reparations into a payoff. By definitions, reparations, the process of reparations is not exclusively a monetary compensation. Reparation is restorations of a people to the status that they were in prior to the offense. So prior to the offense of chattel slavery, the Ma'afa, Africans were unified in a self-defining people. So reparations is not about helping people to achieve, such as if you look at the reparations fight in other countries, it's not about integrating into the systems of the people who engaged in the crime. You know, reparations about restoration. So if prior to chattel slavery, what was the status of African people? So that's what reparations would look like. So what ADOS and FBA is attempting to do is to give African people a status and standing within capitalism and white hegemony, within white imperialism. If you look at the earlier forms of the reparation struggle, if you look at in Cobra, if you look at some of the earliest organizers within the reparation struggle, brothers like the late Dr. Conrad Worrell, or if you look at Randall, or if you look at Samori or Bill Grace, you'll see that these individuals also had very principled stance on anti-imperialism, opposing the U.S. imperialist agenda, Western imperialism in total. They were anti-capitalist, staunch anti-capitalist. So they didn't just say, well, if the United States gives Black people who hold U.S. citizenship a payoff, then the slate is cleared. And even the resources that were to be garnered from the reparations movement were to be earmarked and targeted towards larger anti-imperialism, global white hegemony, industrial and finance capitalism, U.S. militarism. Those resources were to be strengthen the struggle and fund the struggle, not necessarily to end the struggle. Because as Bobby E. Wright told us, blood debts have to be paid in blood, and there's no amount of fiat currency that can be put on the table or distributed amongst Black people with U.S. citizenship or U.S. lineage dating directly to chattel slavery. It's also, as you said, historically inaccurate because during slavery, African people did not have citizenship. We were not recognized as humans. We did not have citizenship, and the borders were not relevant to us. So to confine Black reparations to any type of territory ignores the reality. There were lots of African slaves brought from the Caribbean into the Americas. There were whole blocks of slaves within the U.S. territories that were shipped to Panama, that were shipped to Brazil and the parts of the Caribbean. So Africans were transported. As Dr. John Henry Clark said, the only difference between a Jamaican, a Haitian, and a Black American is a boat stop. So even if you want to say, I want to acknowledge that I'm going to root my calls for reparations or compensation in the atrocity of chattel slavery, then you have to do a borderless struggle because chattel slavery did not recognize borders for African people. We didn't have passports. Getting a passport for an African during slavery, when you put slavery in the name of your organization, in the name of your movement, where slavery is central to your very self-identity, and you want to, as she acknowledged that, hey, you were enslaved in Haiti, you were enslaved in Jamaica, but what she doesn't acknowledge in that is you were not enslaved as a Jamaican, you didn't have status as a Haitian. We didn't have status as Americans. We didn't become Americans officially to the signing of 3 amendments. So the people you're fighting for reparations were enslaved based on their phenotype. So you were enslaved based on the fact that you were Black. And this entire region, the so-called New World, North, South America, and the Caribbean were all pretty much had the same status. So I don't know how you would exclusively. That's just like saying I want to fight for reparations for house slaves, but exclude I want to fight for reparations for house slaves, and I want to exclude the field slave. I want to fight for reparations for Africans in the antebellum South, but exclude the urban slavery. There have been much research now done on urban slaves, and slaves in the North. Slaves of the West, There were not just, we weren't just picking cotton. Slaves were engaged in, as the controversy that came out on the during the Obama administrations, the Africans that helped to construct Washington, D.C.
We cultivated hemp for a long period of time,
right,
too.
right. So we were engaged in all forms of agriculture, industry. We were engaged in every single sector of the economy. I mean, Harvard University owned slaves. So we were even there in academia. We were there shelving books. We were in every component
JP
of this
Morgan.
economy.
JP
Yeah,
Morgan.
so right. So if you're going to say, well, I'm going to fractionalize and divide. Now, if anyone said that, I want only reparations for the slaves in the antebellum South and nowhere else, people would be like, that's absurd. But they think for some segment, it thinks it makes sense that the American reparations struggle, and it's not even a reparation. I don't like
the cherry on top of the percentage of slaves that were even exported from Africa, from my knowledge, and maybe you can correct me on that. You know, I call it the cherry on top because it's the smallest percentage of Africans. So if someone should be talking about in a large form reparations, like Brazil and the West Indies would you know, that would be something. But like how you stated, reparations is, you know,
if
my
you want,
apologies.
the bottom line is the fight for reparations is a Pan-African struggle because the oppression and enslavement of Africans was Pan-African. If you're going to fight an international, if you're going to address a global, worldwide injustice, it has to be worldwide. The remedy has to fit the scale of the offense. If the remedy does not fit the scale of the offense, then it is not just. So if you have someone that has a personal remedy, I go to work and my job and my employer targets me for some type of abuse or wage theft, and then that's an individual going against an institution. So I can go and get a lawyer, a labor representative, and to deal with that. But slavery was not a uniquely American phenomenon. Slavery was not limited to any segment or population of African people. Slavery was global. It was multinational. It was private and public sector. It was multi-generational. And because of all those things, if you only target or if you isolate reparations just to the United States chattel slavery, you are not seeking reparations. You are seeking a ransom. You are seeking a payoff. And I have no problem if that's your limited scope, that's fine. But you should not be able to hijack the terminology. And some people in the ADOS will say, hey, I don't give a fuck about Africa. I don't give a... Is profanity allowed?
Yeah, it's allowed. Yeah,
right. Yeah. So they'll tell you, fuck them Caribbeans. I don't give a fuck what's happening in Palestine. I only care about what's happening in the United States. That's understandable. But I think when they start to articulate that, I think that people can make more informed decisions about their support, because there are many Black people who support ADOS and FBA who in their minds believe they are fighting for justice. They are fighting for Black empowerment. They are even fighting for liberation and those noble gestures, when what you are fighting for is to give Black people a greater opportunity and greater access to the systems and institutions of global white domination, capitalism, and imperialism. The ADOS and FBA are essentially saying to the United States, allow us to be better and more secure allies in your larger agenda. ADOS is not anti-imperialist. It's not anti-capitalist. It's not even anti-white hegemony and white domination. It is the purest form of integration. It is essentially saying we can be better allies to you if you give us the proper resources. That is not by any stretch of the imagination a reparation struggle. And it is really disgusting, because if they didn't call themselves a reparations movement, if they didn't call them and start to co-opt the terminology of empowerment and liberation, I would ignore them by and large. I could just dismiss them. And I think the masses of the people would too. But that is not a very attractive thing. So you have to candy coat this reactionary integrationist movement. You have to candy coat it in liberationist rhetoric in order to make it appealing to as many people as it appeals to. Because Simply ask the question, what does victory look like?
It doesn't look like
What
a
does
stimulus
victory
check
look
to
like?
look. It doesn't look like a stimulus check to me, because that's what reparations under this capitalist mode looks like, is
Right.
a stimulus check.
But
You know?
it's very attractive, especially to
Yeah.
Negro elites, especially to the Black elites. If you, it's probably forgotten, memory hold by massive, but if you read Ice Cube's contract with Black America, if you read a lot of this Black empowerment that comes trickle down liberation, where Black elites and Black people with status come to the Black masses with their solutions, the vast majority of their solutions will basically give us equality with white people. And what does equality with white people look like?
Conformation and segregation.
Well,
or
how did the
integration.
masses of white people become secure? What is the source of the white middle class?
Our culture, us buying into their agenda, which is stating that anything that is relatively African, anything that is relative that we could trace back to our roots in Africa and in a continent that they're actively exploiting. You know, if we then start to care about that, that's going against their agenda, which
Well,
in
but
part.
here's the thing, though. Even when you look at the wealth extracted from the continent, from Black labor, Black creativity, the majority of the wealth that white people extracted went to the nobility. If you look at the height of colonization, the vast majority of white people were impoverished, malnourished, and ignorant. The majority of white people did not directly benefit. They were fodder. I mean, we all know about this little house on the prairie rhetoric, but the reality is these white people were starving and cannibalizing each other. If you go back to the Gilded Age, even during slavery, there's even old songs where Africans would mock the white working class, the white poor. So even though the Europeans stole trillions of dollars worth of wealth through their mercantile system, through their system of monarchy and nobility, and later through the system of capitalism, even though white people did not justly and equitably distribute the wealth that they stole from the world. The majority of the wealth that they stole from the world went to the upper 1%. That's why even white folks, independent of Black people, were having their little communist revolution, their anarcho-syndicalists, their bloody, violent labor struggles. White
Lorenzo
youth were
Camboa,
in
Loren-
the right.
yeah,
White
Lorenzo Camboa talks about this in his anarchism and Black Revolution, where
right.
he kind of
So
breaks it down.
I don't even think the average, because more Black people know more about white propaganda than they know about white history. We know white propaganda, whether you talk to some Kenyans who believe that every white person in Europe lived in a castle, and there was policies from the Horn of Africa down to South Africa and Zania, where if a colonial governor or if a colonial administrator got sick or injured, they would ferry him away back to the mainland, because they didn't want Africans to see a sick white person. We have a lot of delusions and illusions with white people. Simply, not that I'm against it. And I'm telling you, if the check got cut, where they talk about cut the check, I would get in line. But that is called a panacea. A
You talked
panacea
about
is,
this, yeah.
yes. So reparations has devolved into a panacea. And we don't understand what it means to be under these conditions, under this economic system. What would happen if the reparations came out and it was not married to a pan-Africanist, socialist, liberationist ideology and movement? Is all of the reparations money would be concentrated into the Negro elite. And the Negro elite would use that to shore up the status quo. And the status quo is that of, again, capitalist hyper-exploitation of the masses. And many of the Black elites understand this. And when you look at their solutions for the Black masses, they all pretty much want to put us in that status. So this is another situation where we are going to expend the life, energy, and talent of a generation of African people securing something that will not fulfill the promises that it offers us. So reparations is only viable if it is tied to a pan-African liberationist ideology and socialist policies, redistributive socialist policies. Because if everything starts as it is, you have Black people, most of us with negative wealth, and a small percentage of us with wealth and riches. What's going to happen is if every Black person gets that same amount of money, it will go like this. It wouldn't change the unjust hierarchies. How does reparations undermine unjust hierarchies? It just puts more into, it just gives more fuel or more energy to the overall unjust system. Injecting more money into the system doesn't change the system.
That's what I told Cornel West. Cornel West had came on, and he still has yet to even recognize the episode that I did with him, but I could care less. I specified when he talked about the the automated union workers, and how or UPS, how all these unions are fighting, unionizing, and they're fighting for what? For more money. That you just explained what's going to exactly happen as soon as the $42 that UPS got an hour, they're now going to try and circumvent that, so that you have to pay either higher taxes or you have to pay a higher rent rates coming up. So in reality, what are we actually fighting for? What are we actually putting ourselves on the line for when protesting? What we should be protesting for is for the 1% to no longer have control over the means of our production, over what we produce, and how we exploit shit from the earth. And I think that's a conversation that people, again, educationally are not there for, or are not there yet. And it's because we're too blinded by what you just said, this consumerist mindset that is capitalism. We have yet to break through that as a whole. And maybe I'm wrong, and that's where an individual like yourself can correct me. But as far as I'm concerned, we're not there yet. Like, I can't even say I'm there yet. There's a lot of shit that I don't understand, that I'm doing the work too. And I think when we all are at a level, not a vanguard ship, but at a level to where we have a vanguard, we have a masses of people that have been educated, to a level that could be equal to a vanguard. We're not there yet. We have a lot of performative acts that are going on right now. People that say they're for the dismantling and end of the occupation of Palestine, and using words like decolonization, but yet this is an occupation in of it itself as well. So
and that's another thing. You can't really be selective in that arena. You find a lot of people, and this is what liberalism will do for you. You'll find a lot of people that say, well, free Palestine, where Palestine, again, Israel is a product of global system of white hegemony.
Yeah.
So if you have to be against all colonizations.
Yeah.
There are people who advocate for some colonizations or ignore other colonizations, and then they have their pet colonizations. You can't say reparations for Black Americans. You can't just say freedom for Palestine, because again, the solution has to match the scale of the problem. Palestine and the occupation of Palestine and the very existence of a Zionist state is only possible through a global military and a global economic system under white hegemony and capitalism. You have even people that says, well, I want freedom for Black people, but I ain't worried about these other people. I ain't worried about Haitians. So it's a zero-sum game. You'll never hear a capitalist be content with exploiting one resource or dominating one economy. But sometimes we people who stand in opposition to a global system want regional or localized solutions to a global problem. That doesn't mean that you cannot scale down your struggle to a localized problem. There are many problems here in Chicago that are unique to Chicago, many regional problems that I address. But in that address, you have to, number one, recognize connection to the larger global system, and you have to make sure that your solution resonates and structured to at any given time to unite with and to complement the larger struggle. You have to make sure what you're fighting for on a regional, on a local, and even on a personal level does not subvert the larger struggle. So to fight for reparations for Black people who directly endured, number one, chattel slavery, and then another following chattel slavery, another a century of under-resourcing and economic warfare, and say, hey, we need compensation for these people, for this population, which I am a part of. Then say, I absolutely agree with that. But then to say that is a solution to our problem, that is not true, number one. Number two, to say that it has to be exclusive. You have to ask, exclude the Haitians, exclude the Kenyans. The Kenyans have to go to the British. And the Nigerians have to go to the British. The Senegalese have to go to the French. The Haitians have to go to the French. The Congolese have to go to the Dutch. When the Dutch, the French, the Germans, the Americans, the Israelis are all coordinating. They all got UN, they got NATO, they got a whole corporate conglomerate infrastructure, corporate monopolies, where they're all coordinating. They're sharing intelligence. They're trading off weapons. They're trading off technologies. They're sending their scholars to Rhodes scholars off to the various universities, where they have a whole syndicate, a criminal white syndicate of coordination, resource serving, and negotiation, UN Security Council. But we are the people who are under this umbrella of a dome of oppression. We're going to fight it as American citizens alone. And it's disrespectful because there hasn't been, I don't care if it's emancipation, civil rights, opposition to police brutality, labor struggles. There has not been one struggle within so-called Black America that has not had an international component. When you look at the civil rights movement, it wasn't just us non-violently marching. It wasn't just the powerful speeches. It wasn't just Malcolm X
The talented
telling us about right.
Yeah.
It was coordinated with a non-alignment movement in South America. It was coordinated with the Caribbean, Socialistic Caribbean Federation movement. It was coordinated with the decolonization struggle in Africa. Why would the American slavers
Say it. Why the fuck?
Why the fuck were the American slavers so disturbed by the Haitian Revolution to the point where they did everything in their power to suppress knowledge of the Haitian Revolution in amongst enslaved Africans in the United States? If it was them and us, and it was separate, they got their problems, we got our problems. Our oppressors, even when we had uprising in organizations, the first thing the CIA, the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, the first thing they would do is to say, there must be an international infiltrator. There must be a communist infiltrator. There's a fifth columnist amongst the Blacks, because they feared more than anything, more than us having guns, more than our rebellions, and more than our Molotov cocktails. The thing they feared most about us is identifying the fact that this is a global system. The problem is not Harlem. The problem is not Detroit. The problem is not the South, the Deep South. The problem ain't American. And even the white majority doesn't understand this. You got white folks walking around talking about, we're patriotic. I'm going to buy me a Ford. I drive Chevy and Ford. I'm a patriotic. While the CEOs and the investor class are like, Ford is a global company. They put American flags in their US advertisement. They put Japanese flags in their, Ford has no love or loyalty for Americans. Patriotism itself, they were like, we will dominate and govern the globe. And everything we do is on a global scale. You look at Bill Gates. You look at these elites. You look at Bill Gates. You look at Bezos. they're not just trying to dominate or rule the American economy. They're not just buying up land and imposing policies and influencing and financing U.S. presidents. So even the white, even if there's the racist, right-wing, fascist whites, or the liberal or leftist or progressive whites, even those amongst those populations understand that, hey, the people in our camp that just think this is an American issue are severely misguided. Severely misguided. Even the America First people understand, whether the reactionary right wing or even hit to this like the globalist. We want to fight the globalist. Because they understand shit. If you just confine yourself to the red, white, and blue, and all of your problems and solutions are defined within the confines of the concept of the red, white, and blue, you a sucker. You're gonna get played. Even if you win, you're gonna still be at a severe deficit. These crackers could give every black person in this world $1 billion.
It'll always go back to them somehow.
And then the international the international currency market can bottom out the US dollar. Look what they did to Venezuela and Venezuelan currency. Look what they do to the dinar and the pesos. Most Def, shout out to Most Def. This is one thing black folks have to understand. He said, when we start keeping pace, they change up the tempo.
Yep.
When we keep pace, they change up the tempo. So they were like, let's allow black people to exhaust their most brilliant and committed black people, exhaust another 40, 50 years trying to secure reparations. And then we'll say, okay, let's cut the reparations check because we're about to hollow out the dollar. We're about to disconnect. The US dollar will no longer be a US currency, the world's standard currency. The petrodollar will detach global carbon resources from the dollar. Boom, boom, boom. And we'll just write some policy. We'll write some policy. Listen, wealth is not having a lot of fucking money. Wealth is not rooted in money. When Europeans came to the United States, did they overthrow the Native Americans by accumulating a whole bunch of Native American currency and out-competing?
They slaughtered.
What was money in America? What was money in America the day before white folks got here? What was money in Africa the day before white folks got there? Because people always say, you need money to have a revolution. How you going to have a revolution without money? So I don't even think
it reminds me of what Killer Mike said,
right.
There's already $100 million back in Cop City. So no one has $100 million.
I say all the time, power is not accumulating wealth.
No.
Power is defining wealth. Power is defining wealth. You'll go out today and go get $1 and say, well, I got me some money. And you go to a store the next day and like, oh, that's not the dollar. It doesn't have the magnetic strip and the chrono paper. So this is money now. As Dr. Wright said, we were once currency. You could literally walk up to a plot of land with a half dozen black people and say, I want to purchase this land, and give them a half dozen of our ancestors. That was money. Cowrie shell was money.
Scalps.
And when you look at who has the money versus who doesn't have the money, what really separates those populations who have money versus those who don't? Is it how well they save? Is it how frugal they are? How hardworking they are? Is it even how smart they are? Is it the resources? We know France. What is the natural resource coming out of France? Let's say France shuts the whole world off from its natural resources. Who would notice? Japan. Remember all Japanese, especially in the 80s and 90s, they were like the Asian tiger economy. What natural resources does Japan have? The UK? What natural resources does the UK have? If natural resources equaled wealth, Congolese would be the wealthiest people. If natural resources equaled wealth, Haitians would be wealthy people. I don't know if you ever worked with a Haitian, Whenever I would get a job, when I worked in New York for years, whenever I got a job and I'd walk into the room and into the employee lounge and I hear a Haitian accent, I'm like, oh God. Because nobody Haitians grind, they work hard. They're some hardworking people and they expect everybody around them to work hard too. It's ridiculous. In fact, yeah, but if hard work, what's the route? So what the real route to wealth is number one, defining what wealth is. But how do you define what wealth is? As Amos Wilson teaches, the greatest asset people can have is ideology and identity. Ideology and identity. We can say, hey, your ideology, just make it personal, and your identity is just that of as a offspring of a slave person. Your ideology is American patriotism, and your identity is that of a formerly enslaved people, or your identity is an American citizen. Just listening to that is extremely limited. We can only go so far with that, and if we got everything that has to offer us, white people are losing ground. White folks are losing ground. Their life expectancy is collapsing.
That's why they're telling people to go to
their
these plasma
overalls-
centers.
Right. I mean, listen. Go to white neighborhoods in Arkansas, Kansas, Indiana. I mean, who could really understand who white people are and then see them as our goal? Closing the wealth gap. Because when we look at the numbers and the wealth, white folks got all the money. Yes, sometimes I go around even affluent white neighborhoods and I'm like, you steal the wealth of the world and this is the best you could do with it? These McMansions? It blows my mind. But all that to say is integration. And we talk a lot about this wealth gap, the wealth gap between whites and blacks. And the response, the appropriate response to the wealth gap is not to get closer to white people. The appropriate response to the wealth gap is to chart a new direction. Because when people talk about the wealth gap, and they always talk about white households versus black households, how much fiat a white household holds. So when you talk about closing the gap, let's say I'm out ahead of you, right? And you want to catch up to me, right? What's the first question you should ask if I'm out ahead of you and you're you're behind me? What's the first question you ask when there's a gap between two people?
How did you get there?
That's the wrong question. Wrong question.
Okay.
Try again. What's the first question you should ask?
I'm drawing a blank right now. I feel I'm drawing a
Where are you going?
blank. Okay. That threw me
The
for a loop
first
right
question we as African people ask when we see the various gaps, the achievement gap, the economic gap, the technology gap. When we see a gap between whites and blacks that has existed since the first day of slavery, we have to ask ourselves, there's a gap between whites and blacks in the United States. Now that's acknowledged. That's something you have to acknowledge. The first question we as African people, before we start to plan on how to address the gap, we have to ask, where are the whites going? What is their trajectory? Political, economic, ideological, social, cultural, political trajectory. Where the fuck are white people going? Because once you answer that question, your solution to your problems might not be to close that gap, but to make the gap wider and accelerate the gap. And I know black people are thinking, wait, if we accelerate the gap, that's less property. That's fewer black-owned businesses. That's less fiat currency for us. Because, yes, that's all within the gap. But what else is within that gap? So I call it a wealth trap, an achievement trap, because it's actually a trap. Because in closing that gap, we got to go through what they've been through. We got to do what they done did. To get what somebody got, you a lot of times got to do what they done did. And that's why the more we fight to close this gap, the more reactionary, right-wing, misogynistic, imperialistic. I even hear black people out here talking about eugenicists. I'm even running into black people who are adopting phrenology, imperialists, black people waving guns online. Like black people are truly becoming equal to white people. Seeking equality with white folks makes you equal to white people. So a lot of times we'll say, well, there's this gap. Maybe because maybe we should just chart a whole new direction. And guess what? If I'm not following you, how is there a gap? Because this is black folks and white folks, and this is black folks, right? And white folks way out ahead of us. If we go this way, we close the gap. But if we go this way, we completely eliminate the gap. The gap is non-existent. So these concepts, that's why revolution is an intellectual endeavor. Europeans didn't overthrow the monarchical system, the backwards monarchical system, by every European becoming a king and a queen. They overthrew the monarchical system by either taking all the power away from the king or decapitating the king. So we don't alleviate our poverty and our material deficits in relationship to white people by getting as much money as they do. We get it by emptying, hollowing out, or decapitating the economic system as a whole. And I think that's a better expenditure of our resources. And then you had said earlier, I don't know if we were live or we were talking before the show, where you talk about revolution and blood, right? Yeah. But here's the thing about revolution and the bloodshed in revolution. Bloodshed is equal or greater in submission as it is in revolution. So the defining factor of revolution is not the bloodshed. Because what does submission look like? They told us, black folks, when we were doing black power and we were in the streets and how we yearned to burn, baby, burn, what were the consequences of black people engaging in radicalism and black power struggles? Incarceration, homicide, and displacement and isolation from the society, right? So let's say we have surrendered the black power struggle in the 60s. They obliterated, COINTELPRO, the black power struggle. Did incarceration go down?
No.
Did bloodshed and homicides reduce for black people?
No.
Did displacement and discouragement go down? Did government surveillance and subversion of black people go down? Many respects, all of the consequences to black people being rhetoric, all of the negative consequences of revolution, as people define it, you gonna get killed, you ain't gonna be able to find a job, you won't be able to intermingle in society. All of those things increased when we went apolitical, when we surrendered the revolution, when we allowed them to dismantle the black left, the black radicals, the black revolutionaries. Those things increased. Sometimes, or oftentimes, resistance and being in an active resistance and uprising will bring you more peace than submitting. Let's just go to what's trending now in Palestine. I think people really need to look like when there is no active intifada. Even before the PLO, forget about Hamas, when the PLO organization, before it was formed, look at the state of the Palestinians when they weren't actively rebelling. And then you have a really good example because you have the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And between those two, there's more violence and resistance in one than the other. But did Zionist infiltration and displacement, was it more intense in the areas that were peaceful or more intense in the areas that were in rebellion?
They intensified.
The Zionists more intensely expanded into the non-violent Palestinian communities than they did in the Palestinian communities that were in open revolt. So tying revolution to violence, I think sometimes distorts people understanding what violence is. We had some of the highest homicide rates and violence and even rebellions in the 90s. Back in my college years. And there was no revolution. Revolution is not about violence. Revolutionaries don't even dictate whether or not there will be violence. Revolution is an intellectual and ideological endeavor. Violence is a given under oppression. You're going to get violence under oppression. So that's going to be whether you're resisting or submitting. They have been violent against us. They have conducted violence against us, whether we have submitted or resisted. The violence is a given. But a lot of times when in their media, they will portray the violence differently. You know, I just had a guy on the last show. Some Urugu called Jared's daughter a nigger, driving past her in a car.
I heard about. I
and
watched
the guy
that,
comes to me to say, "Well, should she be violent? Should she engage in violence because somebody called her a nigger?" And I had to point out the fact that you got called a nigger. You were already engaged with violence.
Violence.
If
Yes.
somebody walks up and slap you, black people have been indoctrinated to believe that somebody slapping us and us not hitting back is a nonviolent encounter. Dr. King being spat on and pummeled with stones means that he just had a nonviolent march. We see black people sprayed with water hoses and stomped out and spat upon, and we say, oh, that was a nonviolent march. Because they've allowed us to say violence is only when the oppressed people strike back against their oppressors. But the violence of the oppressors is standard, is normalized. We'll turn on the TV and see that we have a new micro nukes. We have depleted uranium arms. The Pentagon budget has been increased by another $1 trillion, and we'll be sitting there. And then the next segment, they'll be like, half a dozen teenagers ran into Target and stole something. We'll be like, gasp! Look at that violence! Look at that criminality! Well, you'll watch them arming themselves in apocalyptic weapons, funding apocalyptic weapons, and you'll just watch it. Nightly news, because their violence is standardized. It is normalized. So revolution does not provoke violence. Revolution does not cause violence. To be honest with you, in certain systems, revolution does not even require violence. It is the oppression. It is the exploitation. It is the injustice. It is the unjust hierarchies that create violence. That's on them, not on us. The violence, that's why I won't condemn Hamas. What the fuck I look like condemning Hamas?
Right.
Hamas didn't provoke that violence. They're responding to violence. Anyway, my wife is here. We have to head downtown. So,
well, I want to thank you for coming on.
We didn't even get to the topic, did we?
No. We got all of the first topic down. So I do want to thank you for going in depth, because you did explain a lot that needed to be said. I want to thank you again for coming on. I know you do have somewhere else you need to be. If I can, I'd like to schedule you so we could do this part 2. Before, just to leave people with something. And it's a quote that, maybe
I'll stay on topic. I'll bullet point that shit. I'm gonna just one sentence answers to all your questions.
Okay.
No more pontificating. Next time.
Next time, yeah.
Man, you're gonna get me in trouble.
No problem. I'm gonna leave us off.
Pull out your rollout couch. You got a futon in your living room? Because you about to
no, I got a chase. I got a chase. What is that? I'm gonna leave people with this quote. And it's really a quote that's taken out of context from someone who I deeply admire, and someone who I'm pretty sure you do too as well, Diallo. And that is the individual by the name of John Henry Clark. No more dinner invitations. I don't want no more dinner invitations. I'm sorry. I don't want to sit at your table. I don't want to eat your food no more. I don't want nothing to do with it. And I think a lot of my viewers, we need to start thinking that way. Next episode, I'm going to be getting into Lorenzo Camboa's Anarchism and Black Revolution. And the first chapter goes in depth on he says white supremacy, but in the next episode,
white supremacy.
Yeah, with Diallo.
I'm out on that. I gotta go. You can make your announcements. You know.
Yeah, you go ahead.
But I gotta be out, and I'm gonna holler at Jared for ducking you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll leave on that note, on that starting some mess. And now I really got to go, so I can let that linger in the air. Peace.
Thank you, Diallo. I'll see you later. Well, I will be leaving this episode with just kind of giving you guys some updates. So next episode we'll be getting into again anarchism and Black Revolution. This is a book that, and I'll just to be completely honest, the pen and the paper, as she was on previously, did an audio book of it, and the first part, chapter 1 of the edition that she had, which is the original edition, it's more like a pamphlet. I want to read that one more than I have the book that I read last year. I believe it was last year. So I'm going to go in depth. Chapter 1 is what we're going to start off with. I hope you guys like this one, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Please join me in praying that I don't say something we all regret. These are dangerous times. Mr. President, are you sure about this? It's not a coincidence that in the scriptures poverty is mentioned more than 2,100 times.
Look in my eyes, what do you see?
These issues are as alive as they ever were.
Neon lights, Nobel Prize, when a mirror speaks, the reflection lies.
This is not about charity, it's about justice.
I know your anger, I know your dreams.
But justice and equality are mates, aren't they? Justice always wants to hang out with equality, and equality is a real pain in the ass.
I'm the smiling face of your TV.
I changed the channel.
Oh, there's a law of compensation, and there's an accounting to be held, an accounting that shall make the depression of 1929 seem as a prosperity when it breaks upon.
Only you can set you free. The cult of personality.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their